Hey, y'all. Good morning. So glad you're here. I'm from Mississippi. We don't play around. I am so glad that all of y'all are here, and we have decided to retitle the panel, Whose Vision of Urban Mobility Will Triumph? Because even though I feel like we should be able to take back that word at some point, right now I'm just going to avoid it. And through consensus of the panel, we have renamed our discussion. So I'm Salita Reynolds. I'm the general manager for the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, appointed by Mayor Garcetti in 2014. So I've had that job for about 3.5 years, which makes me the 8th general manager in the last 14 years. So, right, I'm just busting the average, just busting it with 3.5 years, which seems like nothing to me. I'm also the president of the National Association of City Transportation Officials, NACTO. We represent about 64 of the largest and medium-sized American cities, a couple of cities in Canada and Mexico as well. And before that, I worked for a consulting firm called Fair & Peers and also for the cities of San Francisco and Oakland. So I'm going to get us started and frame the conversation a little bit. Each of the panelists is going to come up and give a very quick overview of sort of what they're working on, or you can stay seated if you'd like. And then we're going to open it up into a moderated discussion. I have some questions that we'll start with, but please feel welcome and invited to bring your questions towards the end of the conversation. So I'm going to start out with a couple of projects that the City of Los Angeles recently put in on the west side. The city passed the Mobility Plan 2035 not too long ago by unanimous vote of the City Council. It was a visionary plan that rethought every street in Los Angeles in a comprehensive way. It was the result of 3 years of public outreach and conversation, literally hundreds, thousands of comments collected from neighborhoods and places all over the city. And when it came time to vote for it, each council member was deeply engaged. They each had a project or an idea that they wanted included. Some of them wanted them removed. And for the most part, the planning department honored those requests. And so what emerged is meant to be a guiding document for the design of the city to reach some of the most ambitious sustainability, public health, safety, quality of life, social cohesion, community happiness, economic development goals in the country. But there is a very wide river between a visionary long-term plan and an actual project on the street. And so as the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, we don't set policy. We are implementers. We are an implementing agency. We manage people's mobility around the city. And what that means is that we have to go out and do outreach, we have to do evaluation, we have to do design, we have to do all sorts of things in order to bring the policy to life on the street. So this is one such street. This is Venice Boulevard in Mar Vista in West Los Angeles. This is part of our high injury network, which means it's one of the most dangerous streets in the city, no matter how you travel, if you're walking, if you're biking, if you're driving. And you can take one look at it and see why that might be. It is a wide street where people driving can get up to high speeds, but there are also large numbers of people walking and biking and taking transit because we are in the middle of a vibrant neighborhood. This is the main street for Mar Vista. It's also a state route, which means that the state decides what it looks like. We went through a process, again, over the course of about 1.5 years or 2 years to get input from the community about how they might want to redesign the street. We marched up to Sacramento and actually took this street back from the state so that we could design it the way that the community had asked us to design it, which is no small task. We even put the design out on the street for a day. We actually put in a protected bike lane, parklets. We took away a lane of traffic to sort of bring the traffic down to human speed through the middle of what is a beginning and beginning to grow and thrive commercial district. Because we know through repeated research that cars do not shop, people do. And the most successful commercial districts in any city have levels of service that are D, E, and F, levels of congestion and speeds that match a thriving commercial district. So we knew we wanted to bring the street to life to reflect what was happening in the neighborhood around it. And we went out and actually put the design in. We put in a couple $1 million worth of capital improvements, including new pedestrian signals, protected bikeways. We flipped where the parking and the bikeway sit. And we did it as a pilot to actually understand, evaluate, measure, and go back and talk to the community about how it was working. This is what it looked like during Mar Vista's Art Walk. Those are parked cars. That's not congestion. There's a food truck there. And you can see this looks like a place. It looks very different from this street, which isn't a place. It's some place you go through and not to. This is a place. This is a heart. This is a main street, right? But there is a trade-off here, and the trade-off is an average of additional 30 seconds or so to your afternoon commute. This is Los Angeles, so every single one of those precious seconds is felt in a visceral way by people who use this street every day. And I don't mean to minimize their concerns or say that in a sarcastic way. That is true and it's real, and I know it and feel it in a very deep way because I am on the receiving end of all of the comments and questions, et cetera. And so this is sort of some of the early press that we got, right? Very positive press. A few neighborhoods over in Playa Vista, we had a similar project. And that project went in at exactly the same time. And immediately, these kinds of websites started popping up. This is Keep LA Moving. There was a sort of a GoFundMe that sprouted up to fund a recall campaign for the council member whose district this is. There was petitions and all sorts of op-eds and all kinds of things that blew up because of a design we did because of a 16-year-old girl, Naomi Larson, who died while trying to get across the street from Dockweiler Beach to where she had parked her car. So both are lane removal projects. Both are consistent with the mobility plan. Again, we are just executing the city's vision. But this has prompted and begun a very toxic conversation. And we actually went in and tore out almost every single improvement that we put in Playa Vista. And that anger has now boomeranged back onto Venice, onto the Venice project. And we are in the middle of a similar sort of discussion about preserving and protecting the vision of what that street wants to be. Because the mobility plan is very clear. The Los Angeles of the future needs to look like Venice Boulevard. So I'm going to put that there for a minute, and we're going to go on to a no less pleasant topic, which is the arrival of technology and private mobility companies in transportation in Los Angeles. So, on the one hand, we have these pitched battles over street design. On the other hand, we have a different kind of quieter battle being raged about the role of the private and public sector in the future of mobility in Los Angeles. The city has very little control or ability to regulate a lot of these private mobility companies, and what's coming next are sort of massive, centrally managed fleets that move people around our city. And there are real questions about the value of this kind of investment, $120 billion of investment in the largest capital build-out of subway and light rail in North America, which is this animation. And when I come back from a public meeting on the west side, I turn this animation on so that I can meditate and calm myself because this is such a powerful reminder of what happens when voters are asked, what is your vision of the future? That they voted to tax themselves to build out a tremendous and robust system that befits a world city. This is Uber's coverage after being in Los Angeles for about a year and a half. No matter how fast we build this, we will never build it fast enough to reach this number of people. So how can we begin to have a conversation, even in light of the fact that we disagree on some very fundamental principles and are not able to engage in regulation? How can we move forward in collaboration to make sure that this doesn't render this sort of a useless investment? Because here's another little insight from a tech entrepreneur about his vision for Los Angeles and the future, and about how he feels about public transit and about its ability to take our city into the future. I'll let you read the quote because we're in polite society and I'm not going to read it out loud. But this quote reverberated around the transportation community, and particularly the transportation community in Los Angeles. Whose vision of the future is this? Who are these tunnels for? And are we going to allow this kind of takeover of the vision of mobility in the future of Los Angeles? Anybody know what this is from? Blade Runner, right? So here's Hollywood telling us what they think their vision of the future is, and it looks exactly like today, except the cars are flying. Right? So as we try and unpack, how can we have a discussion about a really different vision of the future? Because right now, the level of discourse is this. This is the Boring Company flamethrower that is now available for you to purchase to show your allegiance with the Boring Company's work in Los Angeles. And in public government, we don't want to be seen as this for innovation, right? We're not trying to chill and freeze innovation, but we are trying to find common ground with the private sector to have a real discussion about the future. This is from NACTO's Blueprint on Autonomous Urbanism. This is our sort of collective city vision of what the future might bring if we really can get shared mobility, autonomous vehicles, electrification, and public transit all in the right roles working together. That our streets look like this. They look more like Venice Boulevard. They're thriving, they're public space. And lo and behold, just last year, actually Lyft, in partnership with Perkins Will and Nelson Nygaard, came out with a very, very similar vision of the future that looks just like the one that NACTO came out with. So what's heartening to me is that there are opportunities for common ground. And I think there are opportunities for common ground both on street design and on how we manage the public and private role on the street. But this panel is about how we actually get there, because we are very far away from that right now. So with that uplifting sentiment, I will turn it over first to Mitch Moore. Mitch is the marketing manager for Blue LA. Blue LA is a large electric vehicle car sharing program that we are launching here. Hopefully we're going to launch on Earth Day. It is the largest EV car sharing program in a low-income community in the country, first of its kind, and we're very proud that it is a true public-private partnership between LADOT and Blue LA. So I'm going to let Mitch come up and give you a quick overview on what they're working on.
Thank you, Salita. This could be the first time I followed a presentation with a flamethrower.
It won't be the last.
It won't be the last. Before we start, I want to give you a quick tip. Been to many trade shows. This is what I'm going to offer you. When you go to sessions like this, just grab 3 ideas out of this, take one of them, and activate it within 24 hours. Meeting, email. I've been to these, and it becomes mind-numbing, the intellectual capital all here, so that's the best way to try to activate it. So, yes, Blue LA. Who's heard of Blue LA? Give me a oh my gosh, holy smokes.
Your job is done, Mitch. You can
Yeah,
go home now.
I'll see you later. No, Blue LA, electric vehicle car sharing program for disadvantaged communities in LA. Okay, that's the that's the narrative. That's what we're doing. That's what we're working on. But and we're targeting the disadvantaged communities. But let's get to the heart of the matter here. Look at my tiny little map. I feel so small next to those maps they were showing us. But this is the area we need to start and serve, you guys. I cannot expand this out all over the city. I have to target where these disadvantaged communities are, get the learnings, and move on. See all these happy people? See how happy they are? My job is to keep them happy, okay? You know how hard that job it is? I have got to keep Salita, Marcel, the mayor, my boss, our community-based organizations. That's why we're here. Now, talking about a public and a private partnership, is that easy? It is not going to be easy. Is it painful? It's going to be painful. Can we do it? No, we will do it. Let me say that again. We will do it, because my job is to show that there is a business case that serving this market, the underserved community, can work. What I heard, I don't know this to be true, when they put out the RFP, they were not blown away with 20, 30, 40 companies coming to beg for this business. But I'm going to show over the next couple years that this business can work, because at the end of the day, this is who we're really serving. And I believe, and I know that we can help those folks. I know that we can help them move and inspire and empower them, that will help their quality of life. And not only these people, but I am working within the local businesses within each one of these communities to create promotions, to increase the quality of membership. In fact, we're at 7th and Bonnie Bray. Diamond Buffet, Seafood Buffet. Please go there. This is my first partnership. We've got a BOGO with them. You know what a BOGO is? Buy one, get one. Of course you know what a BOGO is. So think how cool that is. She was telling me that a lot of these families don't come to her buffet because they think it's too costly. So now I'm creating a cool experience. Now you can take the whole family out. So that's the start of it. Thank you, Selena.
Great. Okay, so Sarah is up next. Sarah Ashton runs public affairs for Uber in Southern California.
Let's see, do we know with the, there we go. Let's see. All right. Great. So I'm Sarah Ashton. I run public affairs for Uber in Southern California. And, you know, I think that I'm excited today to take a minute to talk to you guys about cars, but also truly how they are being used right now, right? Both the positive and negative impacts of that. Ultimately, you see a lot of individual car usage, and that's what we're going to focus on for a little bit today. And then I'm going to turn quickly to two things that Uber is doing in Los Angeles and in the US to really think through congestion. So early stages. So setting the stage, right? We have more than 1 billion cars in the world today, right? That's equivalent to the populations of the US and Europe. So it's significant. Again, coming back to the idea that these are individually used very often, right? So there's a huge public toll to that. In Los Angeles, we spend 2 weeks every year in our car in traffic, right? The equivalent of 2 working weeks. So that's not time with your family, that's not time working, that's not productive time for our community. Not only that, obviously there's a huge carbon impact to that, right? Because congestion obviously leads to increased carbon. So 22% of all global emissions come from the transportation sector. I think when you go the next step further too, you think about how many of these cars are truly sitting idle, right? So 95% of cars are sitting, or 95% of the time these cars are sitting idle. That, in some cities, is up to 1/5 of their land, just to store vehicles. One of the places where Uber and rideshare in general is actually starting to see more immediate change is in the decision-making of purchasing these vehicles. So 10% of millennial Uber riders say that they've either given up their car or do not plan to purchase a new one. We've also seen that a significant portion of Uber riders are much more likely to use public transit as a result of that car releasing their kind of, desire to only be in their cars exclusively. I think in LA, what you can see here is the service and how it's grown in Southern California, right? LA, it's undeniable that we have made, the city and the community has made significant investment both in transit-oriented development and also investment in public infrastructure. But I think that shift is also, as people need to get out of their cars more, or the individual ownership of those cars, it's also because of the option to be able to have an ETA in under 10 minutes in Los Angeles at the flip of a press of a button. So one of the things that we've been focusing on as a company, obviously, is, and policymakers have talked for a long time about the need for carpooling, right? But it's making carpooling easy that I think is the ultimate challenge, right? So we had engineers that would start to notice two people taking nearly the same trip at the same time, right? And so when we launched Uber Pool, we launched it here in LA in 2015. Right now, about 35% of our rides in the city are on Uber Pool. Candidly, if you have ever taken this product, there is still friction, right? It's not the optimal user experience, and I think my associates at Lyft would probably say the same thing about Lyft Line. There's a lot of friction. One of the things that we've been really focused on is thinking about how to improve that experience for people riding on the platform. So if you've ever taken either Lyft Line or Uber Pool, you know that if you're standing on the wrong street corner, it could take a car 10 minutes to get through traffic and get to you, right? That's a terrible experience from a rider. It's a terrible experience for a driver. And so one of the things that we've been piloting and are soon to expand nationally is what we are calling Express Pool, which is truly optimizing where that person needs to walk. So you walk 1 block away, you walk to this corner, and that will be optimal both for the person you're sharing the car with as well as the driver. Places that we've started to pilot it, we've seen about an 80% increase in people's willingness to take that shared option all of a sudden. So we are noticing that it's creating an impact, but it truly takes time to kind of shift that behavior, but it's something we're very much focused on. Another thing we've launched at LAX is what we call Rematch. We've launched this at a bunch of airports. So this is basically previously, as you can see here, there was an assignment lot. So anyone who had taken Uber or Lyft at the airport would know your ETA was approximately 11 minutes, right? And that was because that's how long it took the car to get from the assignment lot to the airport. We were also prohibited from, you could drop someone off at the airport, but you could not pick them up. So if I was dropping someone off, I could drop them off, and then I'd have to exit back to the holding lot and then come back to do a pickup, right? So wasted VMT, wasted time, congestion in the central terminal area. So what we worked with LAX last year to launch was I, as a driver, could drop someone off, say in Terminal 1, swing around, pick someone up at Terminal 3, and exit the airport. We have seen that has reduced about 440,000 Uber vehicles just in the first 5 months. So again, these are having real impacts, and this is really thinking about what are the types of product solutions you could have to streamline that. The other thing we've been working on a lot, and one of the things I spend a lot of my time thinking through, is electrification on the platform, right? Because if the future is shared, electric and autonomous, we really need to make sure that we're also thinking through the electrification component. We've launched pilots both in Portland and in London, and are doing a lot of exciting work here in California to ramp this up pretty quickly. As some other folks may have seen, in November we announced that we will be, in 2020, starting piloting of an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft as well, which is also envisioned as a commuter product. I think it is undeniable to say that I agree with Salita in the sense that these are things that to truly be optimized, we have to enhance the collaborative process. I think that I, as an Angelino, deeply believe in the interconnection of these transit options. I think that to change consumer behavior, you have to make it affordable for them and you have to make it easy for them. And I think there's a lot more that we can continue to do in LA to kind of better integrate those processes.
Thank you. Okay, next we're going to hear from Terry O'Day. Terry is the Vice President for EVgo, which is the leading provider of fast charging to electric vehicles of all makes.
Thanks, Salita. I didn't bring slides, so I think I'll stay seated, which is Amanda's thinking too.
It's all right. Sarah's last picture is really pretty.
It is.
Just
we
leave that.
can
Yeah.
just stick with that. Well, thank you. As you heard, I am with EVgo, and EVgo is the nation's largest public fast charging company for electric cars. I wear another hat with the City of Santa Monica as council member, so I'll talk to both in this discussion and give us some topics that maybe we can play with as a panel. First, about EVgo. When I started at EVgo, we put in the first public fast charger in the United States, and that is a charger that will provide a car with about a full charge in about 30 minutes. Today we have more than 1,000, and we have about a 20% market share. So there are more than 5,000 of these chargers across the country, providing networks that give drivers the opportunity to meet most of their needs with an electric car. In our case, these are urban charging networks that we own and operate. So those networks are designed for the types of communities that this panel is really focused on in mobility. And when we look at some of the major trends affecting our network and our industry, we are moving towards faster and higher power charging solutions. Just as today you don't see a lot of folks using dial-up internet, consumers are demanding faster charging for electric cars. In addition to the consumer trend, you're seeing larger battery packs coming into these cars. They can go farther, but that means they take more electricity on board. That means that the existing chargers that I described at 30 minutes for a full charge now take as much as 90 minutes to fill the new Tesla vehicles. And so while the cars are progressing, we are backtracking in the service level that drivers are expecting. So that's another reason for the push to faster charging. And with that, then we're seeing also an interest in using those chargers to provide solutions around equity, because much of what we're describing, what Salita highlighted, is policy and values question about how we provide mobility services to everyone in our community equitably. And in EV charging in particular, you have today much easier solutions for people who have a single-family home and a garage than those who live in multifamily communities, and particularly those who park on the street, don't have a reliable overnight place to park. And those correlate with lower income than single-family communities. So that challenge is in part being met by increased use of fast chargers and hubs designed to enable people to begin fueling their vehicles just as they do today, but with electricity, of course, instead of gaseous fuels or liquid fuels. The major trend, though, that everyone gets excited about, and that Sarah hit on, as well as Salita, is what I have a slightly different acronym. I call it ACES, right, which is autonomous, connected, electrified, and shared.
Ooh, I like that.
It flows a little
Stealing
easier.
it, Terry.
Good.
Stealing it.
Let's take it. We know the shared economy, as Sarah pointed out, is here. We know those cars are connected and becoming more so, and we are told that they will become autonomous. It is not clear to me yet that they will be electric, and I think it is a question for us in design of our communities and in our public-private partnerships to help to get those miles traveled into electric instead of fossil fuels. And finding solutions around charging hubs for those vehicles will be a critical way to accomplish that. Today, there is a ton of risk, and there is a ton of, and there is a dearth of space available for these types of solutions. And so public-private partnerships can really go a long way in creating this next generation of electrified transportation and the full model of ACES. I think, too, though, when we focus just on passengers, we miss the whole story. And in my view, if I were to guess, I would say that before an autonomous vehicle ever begins taking passengers, they're probably going to take cargo first. And that means that when you're thinking about these charging hubs in our communities, we have to think about how to locate them to enable delivery services that you already see proliferating in our communities and have meaningful impacts on our mobility, not just because they're another vehicle on the street, but it's a parked vehicle in the middle of the street in the worst time of day oftentimes, right? And it is also highly reliant on diesel today, which has the worst health impacts. So when we think about mobility, I think we need to think about both sides, and when we have a view towards ACES, we want to think about these charging hubs. Putting on my city council hat for Santa Monica, one of the top strategic priorities for our council is mobility. We'll be having a study session on mobility in, I think, next month, in February. I want to point out Francie Steffen, who's our mobility planning guru. And when I asked Francie, what should I focus on in this in this panel, she said, if every car was electric, we'd still have mobility problems. Make sure they know that. She's right, despite my chagrin. And so in Santa Monica, we have, in the last 7 years, invested more than $10 million in bike infrastructure. You can see a transformation in our community from that is, it looks different, it feels different than when I started on the city council just 8 years ago. That comes in the form of bike lanes and other infrastructure, but it's also like bike service centers and solutions that help to keep bikes on the road and provide the full, a full model for folks to get out of their cars and become less auto-dependent. We also just recently deployed our first bus express lanes for our Big Blue Bus program, which is nationally renowned. And we've been connecting it to the parking question, right? And so you can see parking fees have increased. We've been looking more critically about parking. We have now imposed our first parking maximums in our land use plan, which is, I think, the first of those in Southern California. And we've combined that with, thank you. Yeah. And we're walking the walk for our city staff as well, implementing now a parking cash out program for employees. They get cash by not driving their cars to work every day, which is pretty fantastic. And it's the combination of all of these factors with services and hard infrastructure that is really beginning to transform the community. They're not only cost effective, they also improve our quality of life, and they really are becoming imperative because fortunately our economy is doing well right now, and that is linked to traffic, and you can see it is everywhere, right? And just to survive and to economically thrive today, we will have to have better mobility solutions in this region. Some of these challenges, but what's interesting, because this is the Triumph Trump panel, is we're also beginning to see a new generation of solutions taking hold, and some of them are coming from private entrepreneurs, some of them are coming from interested members of our community. We have solutions now in place. If you've been in Santa Monica, you've probably seen this Bird scooter everywhere. There's a ton of problems with how it's been rolled out, but it is very popular with a user base in our community. And the challenges that it is introducing are related across the spectrum, but I'll say that importantly, it's also beginning to represent a next generation of mobility solutions that is displacing some of the others, right? So we're seeing people on scooters now instead of bikes. And that's kind of interesting when you think about how we've invested in bikes and which of those investments are bike specific and which enable those other vehicles to operate if those become more dominant. We're also seeing sister strategies. We have a wonderful Breeze bike share program. Lime Bike is now interested in coming in our community as well. And so we have a lot of questions that now get raised as well about our policy solutions and what's on the books. How do these new technologies interact with today's code? And how do we keep pace and enable those new technology solutions, new mobility solutions, to take root, but remain consistent with our code? You know, we are seeing, for example, the ways that these solutions also conflict with other established mobility platforms. For example, we have significant declines in ridership year over year on our Big Blue Bus, and we are going to be discussing that as part of our study session next month. So how do these interact with our existing known solutions as the technology moves faster than the code? And as Salita pointed out, some of the technology solutions really do need a value check. They need a policy apparatus to take a close look at it and a community to have a dialogue about it. Our hope is that with our study session next month, we'll begin to do that and to act on this mobility priority that the council has set.
Thank you, Terry. That was great. So we're going to finish up our sort of round robin with Amanda Eakin. Amanda is the Director for Transportation and Climate for the Natural Resources Defense Council.
Great. Thanks, Alita. So you asked whose vision ought to triumph. And a couple weeks ago, I was asked to speak at the 50th anniversary of the California Air Resources Board celebration. And they asked us to think about our vision for mobility in 2050. And it was kind of a fun exercise to think about what it would be my vision. And I thought about a trip that I take a lot. I come down here a lot to meet with folks in LA, and I thought about taking a trip to SCAG, to the Southern California Association of Governments, which is, not far from here in Wilshire. And I thought my vision would be that I would, which, by the way, that trip currently takes a lot of Lyfts and Ubers and all sorts of fossil fuels. And my vision there would be that I would walk out of my house, I would walk 1 block and get on an electric bike, because there's electric bike share is here now. This is not like some crazy thing. Get an electric bike share, because that would be faster. Zip downtown in 10 minutes. Hop on a high-speed train. Get my coffee, get my bagel, catch up on emails, prep for my meetings. Pull in a couple hours later to Union Station. As I pull in to Union Station, my phone is so smart that it knows my calendar, knows where I'm going. I would get notified of all of my transportation choices to make my last 2.5 miles to SCAG. And so I could take an EV car share, I could take an EV bike, I could take a scooter. It turns out in 2050, transit is still the fastest option to get me that last 2.5 miles. And I would get on the red line and go 2.5, a couple stations, and I would get there. And that could be a completely zero emissions trip. 0 fossil fuels would have to be burned for that trip. And I think that is a pretty amazing vision that we could look at and we could really think about getting there. So then there's the reality, right? Then there's this morning when I tried so hard to take Flyaway to get here, but I stood waiting at the airport for 45 minutes, and the Flyaway never came to Union Station. There were 4 Disneyland shuttles. There were 3 buses to Van Nuys. There were probably 80 airport shuttles to get you to the parking lots. There was no Union Station Flyaway. I had no way to tell when the Union Station Flyaway was coming. After 45 minutes, I gave up and finally took a Lyft. So we're a little far away from that vision. And if I could put out I loved your idea of 3 ideas, three points, Mitch. If I could put out one idea for kind of what we're going to do to 2050, because really it's about 30 years away. One principle that should underlie all of our thinking about land use and transportation is that to design places where no one needs to own a car. No one needs to get in a car to move around. And I know that sounds kind of radical, but I'll tell you, there was a really interesting story about a manager of a transit agency in Florida. He's the manager of the transit agency. This is his job to run the transit system, who for 1 month decided to actually use his own system to try to get around.
Stop it.
And get all of his stuff done and get to work and get to the kids' baseball games. And you know what he found? It was a sucky transportation system. He missed his kids' baseball games. He couldn't get to work on time. And it was kind of like, maybe we should all try to live without a car for a while and see what a crappy job we're doing of actually making that a possibility for people. And I know this because our family got rid of our car, and now I'm always faced with interesting challenges, like how to get places. And it turns out there's quite a bit of transit people don't seem to know about, but we're not doing quite the good enough job getting people all the way that they need to go. Now, one additional option I wanted to talk about was this idea of incentives, aligning incentives. So there's the supply side, there's making the choices available for us, like we're talking about, make that Flyaway run. Maybe we could match the Flyaway with a Disney shuttle, like frequency. Do you think that's like a bar we could aim to hit every 15 minutes possible? Metrolink? But then once we've got the supply, and Salita talked about how we're investing $120 billion in creating all this supply, I think we're missing some tools, and I want to say we're not yet solving traffic congestion. We're not using all the tools in the toolbox because we're not aligning incentives with the sustainability choices we want people to be taking. And just another quick example, I see Stanley from ARB in the audience. I gave ARB a little bit of a hard time at their sustainability conference because they FedExed me a parking pass to come to the conference. But I said, why didn't you give me a train ticket? Because I ended up taking the train anyway from San Francisco. I'd love to take the train. So why are we incentivizing people to do the things that are creating more pollution and not incentivizing people to do the things that create less pollution? So I think in Milan, they're actually paying people to bike to work. I love to hear the parking cash out example that you're giving people the option, take the cash or drive. And it turns out that's got a pretty strong, I've seen in the studies, 20-30% behavior change effect if you just offer people the opportunity. So I think there's, and there's a BART Perks program where they're paying people cash money to not take BART during the peak periods because it's so crowded, and they've got about a 10% behavior change effect just from a couple dollars to take a transit outside of the peak period rather than the peak period. So I think we're missing out on a set of tools if we're not looking at aligning the incentives with those sustainable transportation choices. And the last thing I want to talk about is, of course, this idea that we and SCAG have been developing through the 100 Hours campaign, which I saw Sarah reference in her talking points, which is something we're calling a go zone. And that idea is to look at one of our worst traffic hotspots, one of the places where it's just, like Salita talked about, that 30 seconds really does make a difference because your car is on average on the west side moving at 3.4 miles an hour during the peak period. I mean, you're going that slowly, you are desperate to get home. And so the idea of a go zone is that we would concentrate in a traffic hotspot and we would really up the ante on transit. We'd really make transit a viable option. And we would create shared mobility options, and we would create wonderful biking and walking choices. And we'd include an aspect called a decongestion fee. And that is a fee so that when you want to drive, you can actually get somewhere. It's managing supply and demand. And the most eloquent person out there speaking about this issue right now is Professor Mike Manville from UCLA. And I don't think he's here right now, but what he talks about is that transportation is one of our only utilities kind of that we give away for free. We give the roads away for free, and guess what? Our transportation system fails 2 times a day. Every day, that system fails, and we're all stuck in that 100 hours of traffic every year. We don't give away electricity for free. We don't give away water for free. We manage those assets because we have these very sophisticated agencies whose whole job is they're these balancing authorities to balance supply and demand of energy. And I think on the transportation side, we focus very much on the supply side. We are missing out on all the tools to manage out demand. And so I really hope we can see the conversation go in that direction.
Great.
Thank you.
So I want to thank all of our panelists, and I know that we are standing between you and lunch, but I do want to allow anybody that has a burning question that wants to give it to the panel to ask. Otherwise, I'm going to ask a couple questions. Yes, in the front.
So I was curious about, LA is a perfect example of 88 cities and a lot of roads that pass through several cities. How do you coordinate? Do you feel like there's existing systems to coordinate among the different agencies, or is there a better system that you'd like to see implemented so that we can, for example, Manhattan being an example that put a monkey wrench into the city of LA's plan for using lanes? Would a better coordination have helped mitigate the outbreaks that we saw for those Vision Zero projects?
So the question is about coordination, and I am interested in getting some quick thoughts about that because we have public, private, and nonprofit represented on the stage, and our coordination could always be better. So maybe just some quick thoughts from whoever wants to weigh in on that.
Okay. So on the coordination aspect, public-private, I think one of the challenges we're seeing with some of the new mobility companies is that we don't really have any goals. We don't have any standards for what Uber should be striving for. Just kind of this new thing that's come out there, and it's undermining transit, and it's creating a lot of congestion, and a lot of people love it. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of people love it, right? A lot of people use it all the time. So one interesting role I could see for LADOT or for City of LA would be to set some kind of performance standards, whether that's an occupancy standard, whether that's a vehicle efficiency standard, or a service standard, or a first last mile transit connection standard. I think that would be a really interesting way for our thinking to evolve as sort of how we want these companies to perform in the context of the landscape.
And we are working on a mobility bill of rights and hoping to expand that to Metro and have it be shared so that when we start making policy about, for example, flying air taxis, that we're being consistent, that people have expectations for equity, safety, mobility around Los Angeles, and that those expectations are really measured against our regulations.
Yeah, I'd point out 2 areas for coordination that might particularly be useful. As you mentioned, Metro. I mean, getting cities connected for Metro votes, for SCAG votes, for other, county transportation efforts, I think can be a useful way to help us coordinate. We probably need to do that better. And one of the things I'd mention about the Santa Monica experience in recent years that has impressed me is the importance of communication on these strategies. I mean, in Amanda's vision that she laid out, communication and information tools were really critical to enabling that trip. And we have a Go Samo program that we think is pretty fantastic, but layering it in with other strategies that are regional could help in a situation like Mike Bonin faced, for example, to assure that we are all telling the same message, that we are getting the best data and research in the hands of communities so that we can combat sort of the resistance to change that we inherently face from bananas, which is my word for NIMBYs. It's build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything.
But I want change, Terry.
But we want change.
I want change.
So standing together to communicate these strategies and why they're valuable and how they've helped other communities is really kind of a key piece that has to be a part of these solutions.
Great. Well, I know we have run out of time. I want to thank our panelists for sharing their insight and information. And just to summarize, a lot of my takeaways are coordination, coordination, coordination. And also something you said, Terry, which is about community design. Because none of what Terry, Sarah, and Mitch, and Amanda, and I are working on will bloom if we don't get community design right to start. And that requires a deep conversation about values and a way to shake people out of their positions that they are stuck in right now, which, you have a lot of folks who are, otherwise very left-leaning, folks who are big EV champions who cannot stand bike lanes, right? And understanding the sort of disassociation there, really unpacking that so that we can all speak together in a transparent way and have a rational discussion so that we have all the tools in the toolbox and that we use our power as one of the largest markets in the world to nudge that convergence of of ACEs so that we are coming up ACEs. I'm super into it. Anyway, thank you to all of you.
Thank you.